I should tell you a bit about me and my husband. My name is Ashley, and my husband's name is Ree. I'm 34, and Ree is 32. We've been married for about 10 years, and we have an 8-year-old. I'm 34 years old. I'll call him Gray for now, just to keep things private. I met Ray way back in freshman year of college. I'll admit the first thing that attracted me was the financial freedom he could offer. Let me explain a bit. Ree was quite popular on campus back then. He was popular because his sister was a bit of a celebrity and their family was pretty wealthy. So when I met Ree and saw that he obviously liked me, I followed up on it swiftly. I wanted financial freedom. School had never really been my thing. I figured that if I could just end up with Ree, I'd never have to work a day in my life. I should mention that I liked Ree. He was handsome and kind, but he was too nice. I like my boys a little more bad. I know people on here will say that's toxic and stupid, but everyone is allowed to have preferences. In the beginning, Ray was sweet and nice. He showered me with gifts and paid for everything. I ended up moving in with him. I was enjoying life immensely. I think that was when I realized that Ray was too much of a big fish to let go. I had to end up with him. We graduated and, even though Ree wasn't big on marriage, after a few subtle pushes from me and even my family, he finally gave in and proposed 2 years later. We got married and, of course, it was huge. I've always wanted a big wedding and ours parents sponsored the wedding, so I went all out. Ray's parents were nice to me and I thought they liked me until they insisted I sign a prenup. I signed, of course, because if I had resisted, it would have seemed suspicious and Ray might even have called off the wedding. They then gave us a house as a wedding gift, but the house was only in Ray's name. That's when I realized that Ray's parents liked me, but they didn't trust me. Our marriage was good at first. Ree was attentive and was always the one to make the first move. He was very good to me. I was a stay-at-home mom. I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, as I told Ree even before we had our son. I didn't want to work, and he was fine with that. Ray was still very helpful around the house and even suggested getting a babysitter for Gray so I could still take breaks, but I turned down the offer. Ray worked in his parents' company, which meant he could dictate his own hours. He was a very good parent and our son adored him, which made me a bit jealous of their bond because Gray and I didn't have that kind of bond. So, where did things start going wrong? I think it was when I started getting bored before Ree. I got married and, to be honest, I was cheating on Ray non-stop. I know it was wrong, but everyone makes mistakes. I never told him, but I stopped focusing on us when we got married. I got bored pretty quickly. Ray was a great husband and dad. He was kind, thoughtful and generous. He made sure I never had to lift a finger if I didn't want to. But I began to feel trapped in the boredom of domestic life. Everything felt so predictable and routine. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that this was what I had wanted: stability, security, a family. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more restless I became. Ray's constant goodness began to grate on me. I missed the rush I used to get from sneaking around and sleeping with other people. I know how that sounds, but I guess some people are just wired differently. Ray would come home early from work to Gray and I would spend time together, and I appreciated it, but I also felt stifled. He was always there, always present, always loving. Instead of feeling grateful, I felt suffocated. Gray adored his father, and watching their bond grow only made me more resentful. I felt like an outsider in my own family. I felt like Ray was just too much. I started to resent him. His constant attention and care felt overbearing, rather than comforting. I couldn't even talk to anyone about how I felt because all my mom and friends advised me to do was get a job so I wouldn't be bored, but I didn't want to get a job. I married Ray for financial security so I wouldn't have to work a day in my life again. Working would just defeat that purpose. In fact, every time someone suggested I find a job, I felt angry. They didn't understand, they couldn't understand. They saw my life as perfect: a loving husband, a beautiful home, a wonderful child. They didn't see the suffocation, the boredom, and the feeling of being trapped. I started finding excuses to get out of the house more often, telling Ray I needed some me time. He was always understanding and encouraging me to take time for myself. Instead of finding solace in hobbies or outings, I found myself growing more and more discontent. I'd just drive around aimlessly, hoping to fill a void that nothing seemed to fill. I even went shopping and made expensive purchases. I didn't discuss it with Ray. I told myself that Ray wouldn't mind and that I deserved it. I think about things now and I feel so bad for Ray. He was always there, even though Ray had grown a bit. Ray still didn't push me to work. He suggested I do it. I said no, and that was it. Ray respected my wishes and never pressured me into doing anything I didn't want to do. He was the perfect husband in many ways, always considerate and supportive. During one of these outings, I ran into Kyle, a younger guy I met at a cafe I frequented. He had been the one to approach me, and we chatted briefly. It was pretty clear that Kyle was everything Ree wasn't: spontaneous, adventurous, and a bit of a bad boy. I could feel a spark in the conversation that I hadn't felt in a long time. I'll be honest with you all, that day, we didn't exchange numbers. I started going to the cafe regularly, hoping that I would see him again. After a few more meetings at the cafe, we finally exchanged numbers so we could keep in touch. Kyle told me he was going through a brutal breakup and really needed a friend. I wanted to be that friend. I knew I had a bit of a crush, but I told myself I was just being a good person, offering support to someone in need. Our conversation started off innocently enough. We talked about life and shared our frustrations. Kyle was in his early 20s, so I had a lot more experience than him regarding life. He would tell me about his dreams, his struggles, and how he felt lost after his breakup. Kyle's stories about his ex-girlfriend were pretty intense. His girlfriend painted him as a victim of a heartless woman who had wrecked him and left him broke. I couldn't help but feel sympathetic. He made me laugh, which I hadn't done genuinely in a long time. He made me feel seen and appreciated, and it was intoxicating. Kyle's youth drew me in, as weird as that sounds. His admiration and the way he looked at me made I felt special, like I was the most important thing in his world. I started looking forward to our conversations. I was always checking my phone to see if he had messaged me. Our chats had started as just casual exchanges, but then they became more frequent and intimate. Weeks went by and I became obsessed with talking to Kyle. I loved the attention and excitement that he brought a lot into my life. I changed my phone's password, started being more secretive, and lost interest in Ryan. Ryan noticed the changes in me, but he didn't say much. He trusted me, and I used that trust to my advantage. I would sneak away to text Kyle, and I was always careful to delete our conversations. I became more distant at home and withdrew from Ryan. I didn't want him to touch me or hold me because it felt like I was betraying Kyle. I was the one who was betraying Ree, but I began making excuses to spend time away from home. I'd tell Ree I needed to run errands or meet up with friends, but I was really meeting Kyle. Kyle and I were hanging out constantly. It had started with casual coffee dates and just walks in the park, but soon we were spending almost every free moment together. We started with coffee dates and walks in the park, but soon we were spending almost every free moment together. I was dressing up for him and paying extra attention to my appearance in ways I hadn't for years. I wanted to look good for Kyle to feel desired and attractive as our relationship deepened. We were full-on flirting and knew we were crossing boundaries. One afternoon, we decided to meet at a quiet spot by the lake. It was a secluded area where we could talk freely without worrying about being seen. We had just been talking when, without thinking, I leaned in and kissed him. We moved to the back seat of Kyle's car, and before I knew it, we had crossed the line. We had sex and it was amazing. We finished and sat in silence, realizing what we'd done. I knew there was no going back. I'd betrayed Ree in the worst way possible. Instead of feeling remorse, I felt happy. From that day on, our relationship became more than just emotional. That was when we started having a physical affair. Ray, who was still oblivious to the affair, continued to be the attentive and loving husband he had always been. He noticed my change in behavior but just attributed it to stress or boredom. He tried to engage me in conversations and planned little surprises to cheer me up, but nothing he did could compare to the excitement I felt with Kyle. As the affair progressed, I became even smarter at hiding it. I would delete messages and calls, come up with elaborate excuses for my absences, and make sure I covered my tracks meticulously. The more I got away with it, the older I became. I started to see Ree not as my husband but as an obstacle to my happiness with Kyle. I also started spending money on Kyle, paying his bills and rent. It began with small things like treating him to dinner or buying him little gifts. As our relationship grew, so did Kyle's needs. He was younger and struggling financially, and I wanted to help him. It made me feel I felt more important and alive than I had in years. Of course, there were moments when I felt guilty. I saw the love and trust in Ray's eyes, and I felt a pang of remorse for a brief moment, but I pushed those feelings aside because I had convinced myself that I deserved to be happy and that my needs were more important. The more time I spent with Kyle, the more I resented Ray. I compared them constantly and found I even started to blame Ree for my dissatisfaction. I told myself that if he had been more exciting or attentive, I wouldn't have needed to seek comfort elsewhere. My marriage continued to deteriorate. I stopped engaging with Ree altogether. Our conversations reduced to basic pleasantries. The emotional distance between us widened. I could feel Ray's hurt and confusion. He didn't understand what was happening. I couldn't bring myself to tell him. The truth is, despite feeling guilty, I couldn't give up on Kyle. I knew I was hurting Ree, but I kept pushing those thoughts aside because I was too scared to face them. Looking back, I can see how selfish and destructive my actions were. I was so consumed by my own desires that I failed to see the damage I was causing. My marriage was falling apart, and I was the one holding the match. Despite everything, Ree didn't deserve this. He was a good man and a great father. I had everything I'd ever wanted, but my behavior at home changed. I became more distant, more irritable, and less engaged with Ree. I even started to look gray. Looking back, I wish I had handled things differently. I should have been honest with Ray from the start. I should have talked to him about how I was feeling and tried to work through our issues together, but I didn't. Now I'm left to deal with the fallout of my actions. I was not only emotionally attached to Kyle, but I was also physically attracted to Kyle. He had a bigger penis, I'm sure you understand, and he was also more energetic in bed. Maybe because he was still in his 20s, being with him felt like an escape from the boredom of my life with Ray. Ray tried to talk to me, sensing that something was wrong, but of course I was too involved in my affair to even care when he brought up his concerns. I brushed him off, telling him everything was fine. I even told him that I couldn't expect everything to remain the same after 10 years of marriage. I made it seem like our relationship was just naturally drifting apart over time. I also told him that my main focus right now was our son, Ray. My husband was very understanding. He wanted to believe that our marriage was just going through a rough patch and that things would eventually get better. I was so unfair to Ree. He deserved better than the half-hearted affection I gave him. I gave him some loving attention, but at the time I was too wrapped up in my own desires to see it. I was caught up in the moment, chasing the highs of my affair with Kyle and ignoring the damage I was doing to my marriage. Well, things finally came to a head. I guess I got too bold. What did I expect? I thought I had everything under control, but I guess I was wrong. Ree finally discovered what I had been doing and he kicked me out. He didn't confront me and talk about things like I thought he would. Instead, he threw my stuff out while our son was at school. I'd gone out with Kyle as usual because Gray was at school and Ray was at work, or so I thought. When I came back, I found all my things on the porch and Ray's assistant waiting for me outside. Ray's assistant had been with Ree for a while, but I had never liked him, so I was pretty shocked. I started screaming and asking what was going on. The assistant didn't know much and only said that Ree had ordered him to wait until I returned and to collect the car keys from me. I thought he was bluffing, so I called Ray. He picked up and told me he knew about my affair. He told me to hand over the keys to his assistant and to take my things and leave. At first, I refused, but then Ray told me he would call the police and report the car as missing, as the car was in his name. That made me realize what was going on, and I gave the assistant the keys. By this point, I was still a little confused. I hadn't seen this coming and I wanted to beg Ray, but I didn't want to seem like a beggar in his assistant's eyes. So I waited until he had left before calling Ray again to beg. Ray refused to even listen to me. He told me to check my WhatsApp. He showed me screenshots of my chat with my friend. He said he would send them to everyone we knew if I didn't leave peacefully. I couldn't let those screenshots get out. I had been bragging to my friend about how I had a new boyfriend, Kyle, and how he had a bigger penis. Everyone would turn against me if they saw those screenshots. I was worried that if they saw those screenshots, they'd be against me, so I immediately apologized to Ray, called an Uber and headed to my parents' house. It was pretty humiliating. I'd always prided myself on being in control and manipulating situations to my advantage, but here I was, thrown out of my own home, exposed and powerless. My parents were pretty shocked when I turned up with all my stuff. They didn't know the full story, and I wasn't about to tell them. I made up a story about Ree being unreasonable and needing some space. They let me stay, but I could tell they were skeptical. In the days that followed, I tried to get in touch with Ree several times. I called, texted and even emailed, but he'd blocked me on all communication channels. Gray did reach out to me, though. My parents started asking me more questions about why I'd left Ray. They knew me well enough to sense that something was off. I've been trying to avoid it, but I know I can't keep up the pretense forever. Eventually, the truth would come out and I'd have to face the full extent of my actions. That's why I'm here now. I'm in a bind. Reddit, what do I do? I really need advice. In fact, I'd appreciate anyone who could give me an update. Thanks. Reddit, it's me again. My first post got a lot more attention than I expected, so I thought I'd share an update. I've received a lot of direct messages asking for more details, and the negative comments have been pretty entertaining. I'm used to criticism, so it doesn't affect me much, so please keep them coming or don't, it's up to you. My husband Ed posted the screenshots on Facebook despite saying he wouldn't. They were seen by everyone, including my family and his. My parents were furious and disappointed. They were angry that I didn't trust them enough to tell them the truth and that they had to find out from a Facebook post. Our relationship is kind of broken now. They really hurt that I couldn't confide in them and angry that I would ruin such a beautiful marriage. I've tried apologizing and picking up more chores around the house, but I don't know how else to fix it. My mutual friends have also cut me off. They say that Ree is determined to move on and wants nothing to do with me. They think he'll be serving me divorce papers soon. They've chosen Ray's side and made it clear that they think I was wrong for cheating and ruining my marriage. On the other hand, he wasn't much help when I told him what had happened. He seemed more concerned about his own situation than mine. Fine, he didn't offer any support, financial or emotional. It became clear that our fling was just that, a fling. He wasn't going to be my safety net. He started giving me one. He didn't answer my messages for days. I didn't want to believe he was pulling away, so I kept making excuses for him. I finally went to see him unannounced and met the girlfriend he said he'd broken up with. They'd never broken up. The girlfriend was shocked to see me and even more shocked when I told her everything about me and Kyle. Kyle wasn't home, but he messaged me later. He was insulting me and telling me he had only used me for money and sex. He said I was stupid to think we had anything more. He said his girlfriend would eventually forgive him, but he didn't want me to ever contact him again. I finally got in touch with Ree. He unblocked me on WhatsApp and we talked for a while. He told me he wouldn't forgive me and wanted a divorce. He said he would be fighting for custody of our son. Gray, that was a wake-up call. I told Ree I couldn't let him have custody, but he said I had given up custody rights the moment I cheated. I checked the state laws and they said I was right, so I refused to back down. I will be getting a lawyer. I don't have much money, but my parents have said they will pay for the lawyer, so that's that. I messed up big time. I traded a stable, loving relationship. I've made a series of poor decisions and now I'm facing the consequences. Ree had been a good friend and I betrayed him in a very serious way, so I'm taking a step back for now. I'll provide an update if there's something worth sharing. Thanks for reading. First of all, my husband and I have divorced. I know that's probably the update most of you were waiting for, but I've lost everything. You were right, I didn't get custody of my son, Gray. My lawyer advised me to give it up because in my state, cheating often means losing custody automatically. It's a difficult decision, but I know Gray is better off with his dad. He's 8 now and understands things in his own way. We didn't tell him about the cheating, we just said that mommy would have a different place to live. I've recently had to move house. My husband and I divorced, and the settlement was pretty brutal. He invoked the prenup, which had a cheating clause, and I ended up with very little. I lost most of what I thought I'd secured during our marriage, and losing custody and assets weren't the only losses. I also lost my friends. Our mutual friends sided with Ray, and I've been on my own since. My parents have improved their relationship with me, but they're still disappointed and angry. They're charging me rent now, as I don't have a job. They consider it a debt I owe them until I can pay it off. I've been looking for a job for almost a year now, but I haven't had any luck. The job market is tough, and my lack of work experience is holding me back. I wish I had taken my career more seriously when I had the chance. Maybe I should start freelancing, but it's a bit daunting. I've gained weight, almost 70 pounds, and I'm struggling to lose it. Everything feels like a mess, and I can't help but hate how my choices have led me here. So that's where I'm at. I'm sure many of you are thinking, good riddance, and I get it. Thanks for reading.